The Thrill Seekers Club, from Scary Stories for Sleepovers by R.C. Welch, illustrated by Ricardo Delgado. "All right," announced Peter. "I'll do it." He stared defiantly at the other boys in the treehouse. More than anything, Peter wanted to be a part of the Thrill Seekers Club. Everybody did. It was the club to be in. All of the other boys in the Thrill Seekers were older than Peter, but he was sure he could prove to them that he was brave enough to be in their club. "Okay," said Andy, who was 11 years old and the leader. "We'll meet back here tomorrow morning. If you have the flower pot from Old Man Stamper's grave, then you're in the club." The other boys nodded in agreement. "And if you're not here," added Matt, "then we'll know you were too afraid to do it." "Either that," said Andy, "or Old Man Stamper got you." The other boys laughed as they climbed one by one down the wooden ladder nailed against the tree that held the clubhouse. Peter waited for a moment. Then he climbed down too and trudged back to the street. He stopped in the field at the edge of the forest. From where he stood, he could see the late afternoon sun shining on the giant iron gate of the Final Haven Cemetery. It was the town's only graveyard, and it had been there forever. The town's first mayor was buried there, and he had died nearly 100 years ago. Mr. Finch, the cemetery gardener, seemed like he'd been around for the last 100 years too. He was a strange man who lived in a small cottage near the very center of the cemetery. He almost never came outside the walls of the cemetery, except to close the gate every night. Peter had seen Mr. Finch only once. He was tall and thin, had completely white hair, and he hitched one leg up when he walked. A slightly hunched back made him look kind of spooky, and he always wore a black shirt and black pants. On cold days, he wore a heavy black overcoat. Peter was starting to have second thoughts. If Finch caught him, his dad was sure to find out, and he knew he'd be grounded for the rest of his life if that happened. He tried to convince himself he wasn't scared as he passed the cemetery and headed home. When he got there, his best friend David was sitting on the front porch, waiting for him. "Well?" asked David as Peter walked up. "What happened? Are they going to let you in?" Peter put his finger to his lips and crept around to the side of the house. David followed. "I think so," Peter answered. "But first, the guys want me to prove I'm not chicken." "How are you going to do that?" "I have to go to the cemetery tonight and steal the flower pot from Old Man Stamper's grave." David's eyes grew wide. "Tonight? When it's pitch black? In the cemetery? What are you, crazy?" Peter hushed him angrily. This was not what he wanted to hear. "Big deal," he said. "It's just a dumb flower pot, and I've been through the cemetery before." "Yeah, but never at night," David replied. "And besides, how are you going to get out of the house without your parents knowing?" "I'm going to wait until they go to sleep. Then I'll sneak out the back door." David threw his hands in the air. "Oh, man, that means you won't get to the cemetery until almost midnight." Peter didn't answer. David poked at a spider with his toe. After a long silence, he spoke. "Well," said David, "I can't understand why you want to get into that stupid club. But since you do," he took a deep breath, "I'll go with you tonight, if you want." Peter felt a wave of relief. "Great! I'll come by tonight and knock on your window, around 11. After dinner, Peter watched television with his dad for a while, then went to bed. He lay there in silent anticipation until he heard his parents go to bed. Then he quietly, carefully got dressed and crept to the back door. He opened it slowly and squeezed outside. It was a cool night, and he ran nearly all the way to David's house. When he got there, he rapped softly on his friend's bedroom window. Within seconds, David's face appeared. He gave Peter the thumbs up sign and was outside a minute later. "I can't believe we're doing this," David said as they made their way up the street. trying to stay in the shadows. By the time they reached the cemetery, clouds had begun to cover the moon. There was just enough light from the street lamps to see the gate, but Peter knew it would be dark inside. Why hadn't he remembered to bring a flashlight? "How are we going to get in?" David asked. Peter surveyed the huge gate. The bars were too close together to squeeze through. "We'll have to climb over," he decided, and without waiting for David's answer, he climbed over the gate. David followed right behind him. Once on the other side, they paused to stare down the long central path of the cemetery. Twisted oaks clung to the edge of the path, forming a dark tunnel. More trees dotted the graveyard landscape, lurking in the black pools of their shadows. Peter thought he heard something moving in the branches, but he couldn't see any birds or breeze. The remaining space around them was filled with monuments to the dead. To either side of the dirt path, gravestones, statues, and crosses seemed to grow out of the ground. Whenever the moon would float from behind the clouds, the mix of white stones and crazily angled shadows was almost too confusing to look at. "I still think this is crazy," David whispered. "Are you sure you want to do this? Let's forget about it. We can form our own club." Peter was really tempted to agree, but he took a deep breath and shook his head. He had come this far, he might as well go through with it. "Come on," he said, moving cautiously forward. "Andy told me that Stamper's grave is toward the back of the cemetery, in the oldest part." "Oh, great," David hissed, but he followed his friend. The farther they got from the gate, the darker their surroundings became. The oak trees seemed to strain toward them as they bravely made their way forward. The clouds had almost completely covered the moon by now, and except for the sound of their own footsteps, the cemetery was eerily quiet. Even the birds had stopped moving. Finally, they reached the end of the path, where a small chapel hunched under the trees. "Can we go back now?" David asked. Peter stopped abruptly and swung to face his friend. "Look, are you with me or not?" he whispered loudly. "All we have to do is get the flower pot and go." Okay, David replied. "Let's get it over with." Peter nodded. "Come on, it's not much farther." They quickly passed by the chapel and began picking their way through the tombstones. Once in a while, the moon would shine through a hole in the clouds, helping them to see. Here in the old part of the cemetery, the trees were very big. They seemed to be closer too, as if wanting to grab the two boys. The grass was thick and uncut, and ivy covered many of the tombstones. Crooked stones and broken statues were everywhere. Suddenly, Peter looked up, and they were there. A huge tombstone stood before them, and at the top of the stone, Peter read the name Stamper. Off to one side was a small clay flower pot with some dried flowers in it. Peter lunged for the pot, but it was stuck in the ground and wouldn't pull free. No matter how hard he tried, he could not get it to move. In anger, he kicked at the pot, but missed and hit the tombstone instead. "Will you hurry up?" hissed David as Peter hopped from foot to foot. "The stupid thing is stuck." David came over, and the two boys tugged on the pot. Suddenly, there was a crash as the thing shattered in their hands. They stared at the pot for a moment. Then there was a grunting sound from the trees to the right. The two boys looked at each other in terror. With a sob, David bolted for the front of the cemetery. "Wait!" Peter cried out, but his voice didn't seem to work. He grabbed a piece of the flower pot and took off through the tombstones after David. But as he heard the snapping of branches behind him, his legs seemed to stop working. He stumbled over something and tumbled headfirst to the ground. Panting in fear, he scrambled to get his feet under him. Just then, a hand grabbed his shoulder. Peter spun around, his heart beating so fast it felt like it would explode. It was Mr. Finch. Peter couldn't see his face, but he was dressed in black, as usual. Except, instead of his black overcoat, he was wearing something like a robe with a hood. Mr. Finch did not speak, but yanked Peter to his feet and began pulling him forward. Peter let himself be led. He knew he should be worried about what his parents would say when Mr. Finch told them he'd been caught sneaking around the cemetery at night, but he was still trying to recover his breath. And David, that chicken, he was going to get out of it. Peter sighed. At least he'd be able to prove to the Thrill Seekers Club that he had been there. The moon came out from behind a cloud, and, in the pale light, Peter could see that they were walking deeper into the cemetery. "Hey, Mr. Finch," he said, "this isn't the way to the front gate." They stopped. "No," came the answer as the figure turned toward him. Peter screamed in horror as he saw the rotting, skeletal face of the thing that held him. But as the creature pulled him closer, he realized that only the dead could hear him.